Ireland. I'm going to chair this session. But before we get into the presentations from our speakers, we have a further two inputs from, obviously, in many respects, really key experts in this area as well. And these are young immigrants and their views. So we have a presentation from Elaine Kearney and from David Garrahy. So we're just going to listen to those for a few minutes, and then we'll come back for the presentations and discussions. Thank you.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi, Margaret.
I'm just going to start by asking you, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from in Ireland and your current situation, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'm from Cork, and I graduated from speech and language therapy in UCC in 2011. After I graduated, I decided to emigrate to Toronto to pursue greater opportunities career-wise. And now I'm a PhD student at the University of Toronto in a fully funded program, and I'm continuing to study within the area of speech and language therapy.
Wonderful. And how's it going? How's life abroad treating you?
It's good. I'm almost at the 3-year mark, so I guess at this stage I feel pretty settled in. Mm-hmm. I'd say it definitely took me a while initially to find my feet, but I feel pretty lucky to have had the opportunities I've received so far. My research is based between the University of Toronto and Toronto Rehabilitation Institute, both of which are leading research institutions for my field. And through that, I've been able to access amazing resources, cutting-edge technology, as well as collaborating with experts in my field and across other disciplines.
Fantastic. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the prospect of returning to Ireland in the future, what's your plan? Is it something that you would consider?
Yeah, it's definitely my intention to return back to Ireland. It'll be another 2 or 3 years before I graduate here again. So I guess looking to that stage, I would love to think that there will be opportunities at home. Either plan to stay within academia and pursue a career at the kind of either research and or lecturing kind of role within university. But I guess it's quite dependent on opportunities that will come up at that stage.
Yes. And in terms of returning, I mean, is there anything that you can think of that would deter you from returning in the future? As an emigrant abroad, is there anything that strikes you as something that might be a barrier to future return?
So I guess for me, the biggest pull to move back is definitely my family. But ultimately, it'll probably be my career that will decide when and if I can come back. I'll be looking at career opportunities within academia, trying to secure a postdoc position. And I guess for me, it'll be comparing to similar opportunities that are available in North America in terms of what positions are opening up, is there funding, what resources are available. I would also consider the UK as a pretty attractive option, where Ireland is, a short flight away, and getting home, it doesn't have to be a once-a-year thing.
Yeah, and in terms of today's event, as you know, we're exploring the issue of return migration. I wonder, do you have any thoughts on what you think the Irish government should be doing to connect and engage with people like yourselves? Have you any thoughts on practical steps that could be taken to support young emigrants to return to Ireland when the economy recovers?
Yeah, so I guess one thing that strikes me is, the level to which international companies recruit Irish graduates to work abroad. They come to Ireland, they host job fairs, provide all the information people need in terms of visas and how, to settle in abroad. And I guess, if the Irish government are committed to, initiating this return migration wave, well then I think they need to show that same level of commitment to getting Irish immigrants back. Whether it's connecting with them through, immigration centres, online. Potentially they could set up a database of skilled workers abroad, so that if there is job creation within a certain area, that, that could be met by targeting that area specifically. I think there's definitely ways of doing it. And I think what else? But yeah, I'm not sure what else. But
you've given us a lot of food for thought, and certainly you think that there is steps that can be taken to engage?
There definitely are, and like my sense, I guess, here from meeting other, Irish people is that a lot of people, do want to move back, or they do see that as that would be their choice, within the next, few years. But at the same time, it will be difficult, I think, for people to move back unless they have something significant to move back to. And while we are hearing of, there is, recovery in the Irish economy, it's not really enough, I think, to inspire people to move back unless there's something more concrete for them there.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much, Elaine. That's fantastic. Thank you for talking to me this afternoon.
Good morning, David. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from in Ireland and your current situation, please?
Well, I'm David Garrihy, and I come from Dovilė, County Clare, on the west coast of Ireland, a very beautiful spot. I'm working now in Brussels, and for the past 6 years, I'm currently working in a youth NGO focused on pushing forward youth rights in the European Union and trying to really improve the place for Europe's next generation of young people.
Excellent. And how's life going abroad? Are you enjoying it?
It's well. I enjoy living abroad. I have to say it's an experience that I feel has given me a lot. The ability to meet other nationalities, other people, especially in Brussels. You have so many different, mostly European nationalities. To learn about them, to interact with them, to feel a little bit about their culture and their way of living is a very nice thing. And I like living in a multicultural city like Brussels.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to return to Ireland in the future?
I absolutely would. I think, like all Irish people, there's a pull that comes with being Irish. There's always a strong connection with being with the country that you're born in and that you've been raised in, and with your neighbours and family and friends. I would also, if I went to the stage of raising a family, I could see them only being raised in Ireland, because I know the strong bonds of community that are really important for raising a family are extremely strong in Ireland. So yeah, I could see myself eventually returning home, but the question is at what stage in my life, or at what stage in my professional career as well.
And in terms of returning home, as a young Irish emigrant currently living abroad, is there anything that you can identify as a challenge to returning to Ireland in the future? Is there anything that would deter you from returning? Any barriers that exist?
I think the biggest barrier right now would be what I just said, would be like, at what stage of my professional career do I come home? I guess maybe it's going from a smaller fishbowl to a bigger one. You get skills, and you work at different levels in your professional life that may not be relevant in Ireland. For example, I work in a youth NGO. I develop skills in campaigning, the ability to create networks and movements for change that may not be relevant so much if I went back to Ireland, or I would have to go in at a different level to find a job in Ireland. I know, for example, if I'm working in ICT or pharmaceuticals or sector banking, even sectors like that, there are a lot more opportunities available for Irish people to come home. But in a sector like this, I see the opportunities mainly being in internationally. Mm-hmm. That would be one thing. I think there's also different ways about the connection I feel with Ireland, and whether right now is the right thing to do. And I think the government can do a lot to actually to change that perception of Irish immigrants abroad as well.
Just picking up on that, and a final question. The event today is exploring return migration, but what do you think, or have you any thoughts on what the Irish government should be doing to connect and engage with people like yourself? Have you any thoughts on practical steps that need to be taken to support young immigrants now and in the future in terms of the prospect of future return?
I think the Irish government needs to keep in touch with us. Now, keeping in touch with us isn't just a one-way communication. It needs to be both ways. We need to feel like we are, when we cross the border, we're not just forgotten about. I know, for example, one of my friends is French, and the ability they have to elect representatives in their embassies that take care of them in the country they're living in. Also, obviously, MPs and senators and national representatives as well. They have a vote in their presidency. We have nothing. I mean, there isn't even a list of immigrants in the country kept by the Irish Embassy in Belgium. We have very, very little connection with the countryside. We have with our country. We have this emotional connection, and I think sometimes that's that's relied upon by the Irish government, and it's not enough.
Okay, thank you very much for your input, David. It's been very valuable. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Great. Well, I think we've heard two more really interesting presentations and testimony from young Irish immigrants. I think much food for thought there. So this plenary session is Barriers to Return Migration, and our first speaker is Dr. Martin Russell. Dr. Martin Russell is currently an associate of Diaspora Matters. He was previously an Irish Research Council postgraduate scholar at the UCD Clinton Institute of American Studies. He co-authored the Supporting the Next Generation of the Irish Diaspora, funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in 2014, and he is a forthcoming visiting research fellow at the United Nations University. Martin also served as Senior Research Assistant on the Global Diaspora Strategies Toolkit, launched in May 2011 in conjunction with the then US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's inaugural Global Diaspora Forum. He has written on a range of topics relating to diaspora strategies, including issues centred on the role of government in diaspora engagement, representation rights, diaspora media, diaspora networking, and conflict transformation. So I'll hand over the floor to Martin for the next presentation.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? I always get nervous when you get an introduction like that because people expect something profound. Before I begin, I just want to say hi to everybody that's tuning in online. I believe some of the people that I spoke to for the research project with Dr. Madeline Lies and Professor Kennedy at the Clinton Institute are online. Just to prove that we actually did something, here it is. I want to have my Eurovision moment. Hello from Dublin. I could say something controversial, and that this time next year it could be 12 points to Scotland. But no, before I begin, first of all, I want to thank the National Youth Council of Ireland for their invitation to speak. It's always dangerous putting an academic up early in the morning because we tend to be boring. So what I want to try and do is keep it light and entertaining for you, obviously with some insight, hopefully. And what I want to do in that regard is probably tell you a couple of stories along the way. So if you can stick with me for a couple of minutes when I do the boring academic stuff, then we get into the stories and we can hopefully get some discussion from that. And I suppose in the spirit of the conference and in line with the comments from Minister Deanhan, the great thing about today's conference is that, first of all, we're identifying the issue of return migration as a problem that needs to be solved. And I think in line with that, the talk will close with, hopefully, in conjunction with my work with Kingsley Aikens at Diaspora Matters, offering the beginnings of a solution to that problem. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to stop me. My Cork accent can be strong, so people tend to get confused. That can be a good thing for me. So to begin the title, as you can see it, the next one of the best pieces of advice I ever got as a very young academic, and if we have any young researchers or policy people in the room that kind of struggle with the terminology. When I was a young PhD student at the Clinton Institute, I went into Professor Liam Kennedy, who, believe me, I used to speak a lot worse and I used to write a lot worse before I met Liam. So Liam came into me and I had a tendency to create my own words, right? So I'm sticking by the one, agentification, right? I'll put that out to Liam, he knows what it means. But the boring academic part is that we need to be very careful about how we talk about migration and how we talk about diaspora. If the minister was still in the room, I could say it's like Cork and Kerry, very close but not quite the same, you know? And the same applies for return. One of the things we need to be conscious of, given the phenomenons that are happening in terms of migration at the minute, is that we need to figure out whether we're talking about permanent return, temporary return, or this whole concept of mobility. Migration is seen as much more circular. But where I see the real value, I suppose, and the opportunity for Ireland, because it's down to the work of organisations such as the National Youth Council of Ireland, such as the Irish Abroad Unit, and I'm going to say something controversial that people don't like quite a lot to hear. The Irish government are good at diaspora engagement. We are seen as the top five in the world in this area, along with India, Israel, Ireland, so we have the three I's, China and the Philippines. Mexico are doing incredible work at the minute, and they're quickly catching up on us, so we need to keep going. So migration and diaspora, as I said, there's differences. If there's any young researchers in... Sorry, can people hear me? If there are any young researchers in the room, write a policy paper on this and you will make your career, right? And sell it in the European context. Defining diaspora. As I said, migration and diaspora are very closely related, but they're not the same. Diaspora is a looser term. I would selfishly say a better term, because I work in the area. And we need to be conscious of what we actually mean by who's in the diaspora and what we mean by diaspora, because migration tends to be a narrower framework in terms of first-generation migrants. If you want an example of the differences between migration and diaspora, if people heard last night the shocking announcement by the IOM of the migrant boat from Egypt that was purposely struck with 500 migrants dying, that type of discussion doesn't tend to come up in diaspora. So there's different responsibilities. That's what I'm basically trying to say in terms of how we use the words. The Irish context, I think we're actually quite innovative in terms of how we frame diaspora in two senses. One, we have a very good definition. I'm paraphrasing Joe Hackett, who's a former director of the Irish Abroad Unit, and he said, if you feel Irish, you are Irish. And I think that works for what we have, particularly in the context of culture. And the other way we're quite innovative in what we do is that we provide a lot of access points for people to engage through the diaspora. So if people want to kind of learn more about this, if you look internationally, one thing we have to be conscious of is that we don't look too solely at the Irish example and we place it into a wider context. So if you look at initiatives such as the UN High-Level Dialogue on Migration and Development, the Global Forum on Migration and Development, what you quickly find out is that diaspora is being kind of attached to the migration framework. So they're quite attuned at policy level, particularly to the distinctions between migration and diaspora. And Ireland can take leadership in this, and I think we need to. We're coming to the first story, which is funny. It entails me making a fool out of myself. How and not why, return in the Irish and global context. The why debate, why we should facilitate return, encourage return, is actually quite, again, probably controversial argument, quite a simple answer to that question, right? I think the answer ultimately lies in what I said, looking in before looking out. In a typical Cork phrase, it means get your own house in order before you go looking out. So conferences such as this is where we're going to explore that. And I think we can actually look to the US quite strongly in terms of how we do that. We have quite an orthodox or traditional view of diaspora in Ireland, in the sense of we envisage our diaspora as people that are out there. We have a lot of diaspora communities in Ireland that need to be part of this discussion. So I think we need the US State Department has taken an incredible lead in how to engage diaspora communities here as well. It's not particularly zoned into the return dimension here, but it's something that's worth noting. So the interesting question for me, and hopefully for Maddie and the research, was the how question. Academics love the how question because we have to fund research to answer it. So what does that mean? It's basically the same questions that the Minister brought up this morning along with Marie-Claire and the National Youth Council. Is about how we actually not only facilitate it, but look after people and make sure that they're able to return if they want to, or even if they don't want to, that they still feel connected. One of the great myths of Irish diaspora engagement is that 70 million people want to be engaged. They don't. I think we need to be conscious of that. So how do we get actually through to that whole question? I think bridging research, experience, practice and policy, I think we need to work together. The Minister was quite clear on his view for that, and it was encouraging this notion of cross-departmental engagement. And a signpost, I suppose, from my work personally in terms of my PhD and the work on the report, and Maddie, feel free to disagree, is that there's been a movement recently in terms of making migration or diaspora studies, again, two different things. Actually, diaspora studies is not fit for purpose. We have a relatively poor record in diaspora studies in Ireland, but globally it's kind of at a critical juncture point. But the general realisation or consensus is that we actually need to move towards the issue of function. So where did I learn this, right? I want to bring you on a journey. I was researching my PhD. I was a very young researcher, nervous from Cork, as you were, sitting in the office of recently deceased Congressman Donald Payne. He was, I believe, the first African-American congressman in this district in New Jersey, heavily involved in the Northern Ireland peace process, right? So when I was looking at this and came across this, I was saying to myself, I have to figure out why. You know, if I answer that question and make my PhD. So I was sweating nervously in the office in Washington. In comes Congressman Payne. I come out an hour later, nearly in tears. I didn't get the answer to that question, right? So I listened to the interview again that night in the hotel, came back to Ireland about 6 months later, listening. He actually told me how he got involved. He wasn't interested in the why. How he got involved, he was heavily involved in civil rights, given his background over, that's probably more why, but how heavily involved in the community level in Northern Ireland. You spend a lot of time with the churches in Northern Ireland, and at the end of the day, he was telling me the how was more important than why. And I think that's where we are in diaspora at the minute, and particularly return. So academics love two words, narratives and neoliberalism. I know what narratives means, I don't know what neoliberalism means. If anybody knows what it means, send it on a postcard. I'd be delighted to know. So I put this in diaspora narrative. So I'll kind of scan through this because obviously the immigrants' words themselves are more impactful than what I can say, and the National Youth Council and Marie Claire have done incredible work in that regard and showcasing it today. But in terms of what we did for the research, we held focus groups, one in Dublin for people that have returned, as you see, from across the world. We also held focus groups with immigrants out in the field, because I think we felt it was very important with our colleagues at the Irish Abroad Unit to actually get into the field. And one thing that's been hinted here actually as well today is the notion of a kind of a distinction between urban and rural. I think it's real. And I think if again, the GA is the flagship operation in this. If you look at the work that they're doing with Connect Ireland in this regard, it's important, because I think the expectations are different in terms, and the experiences of immigration are different. So just to give you kind of a sample outline of what the people said, this is a difficult one. It's one of the core elements of effective diaspora engagement, if you want to use the lingo. It's critically important to have trust. And at the minute, the trust levels, I think we have to be honest about it, in terms of the Irish communities abroad, particularly and with government, but also with kind of sectors where they could return into, it's just not there, you know. I think it could be got back, but the most important thing to realise is trust is not an event, it has to be earned. So there's tools and strategies to put in place to do that. Related to that is this notion of diasporic loyalty. People, when they move away, they're in a conflicting state of, this is kind of academic, but they're in a conflicting state of identity and almost in flux. And sometimes they find it quite difficult to figure out who to be loyal to. Should they be loyal to Ireland, or should they be loyal to their new homeland? And it can have an impact on people, and it comes up quite a lot. I think communication is important with the diaspora communities abroad. I see Kearney here from Generation Immigration. They deserve special recognition for what they do. I think diaspora media and what they do is critically important, but I think the Generation Immigration lead the way in doing it in a responsible way. I think it's important that we get the message right. Some recent articles haven't been to the right tone. Opportunity, critically important. That's not, I'll come to the question of the government later. That cannot be the sole occupancy of the government. Familial, the ties with family are critically important. And it ties into the next point of what I call reactionary return. When people were talking about coming back to Ireland, sometimes due to kind of family illness and things like that, or particularly very close to home, the return becomes almost reactionary, it's unplanned. And they're beginning to fall into vulnerability brackets, because that was one of the questions that we had to tackle in the report. Digital media and global citizenry. It's a controversial argument. I honestly believe through education we should be preparing our students to become global citizens. What that means, I think nobody kind of knows, but we use the word again, you know. And it basically comes down to what Gabriel Scheffer, who in my opinion is probably the grandfather of diaspora studies, calls being here and there. That is the ultimate diasporic aim. Ultimately, in terms of return, we want them here, right? So the story tour is going to give extracts. I don't think I need to go into that in too much detail in terms of what's been said already, because we've had visual representation of that. But I want to tell you one story about cows, right? And one of the great lessons of the gathering, I think, is that first of all we need to understand that diaspora engagement on one level needs to be fun, but I think the most important lesson from the gathering is that maybe it's not even about a connection to Ireland, it's about a connection to a place. And I think this extract actually kind of brings it up. So if I just find this one. So a lady that we had in the focus group, I would say is not so site specific in terms of coming back. I totally agree with the sea element, and I'm from Roscommon. I have no experience of the sea, but there was something so important about the sea in the Dublin Wicklow Mountains and the sea and the cows. I am from a farming background, and I never thought that, maybe as getting older, they would be so important to me. But I will be taking the train to Limerick and looking at those beautiful beasts. You know, so there's something there, you know, and I think what we need to do as well is that we can be, and this is a challenge for government, and again I think the Irish government are doing a really good job in it, and I hope to see it continue, is that we can be quite hard in the rhetoric we use around engaging diasporas, but we need a much more softer tone as well. We need to be conscious of that. How you bring the two together, I'm not quite sure, and feel free to offer suggestions. The structural dimensions, here it is. There's a myth about diaspora engagement, that the government should lead it. They should not. Government is established across the globe. I think we have to be conscious of global context and global examples, and we looked at this quite closely in the Global Diaspora Strategies Toolkit. When my work with Kingsley is that the government needs to be in a facilitator role. Because what it does, it basically creates more listening levels and access points for the diasporas to shape the agenda. But not only shape the agenda, but hopefully take a leadership in the agenda. There's a critical distinction there. And I'll come back to a point later when I talk about connecting with your diaspora and mobilising with your diaspora. Two, very closely related, but different things. We need to, in terms of when to engage in terms of issues of return, I think it came out quite strongly in the report that we need to be doing more pre-departure to keep people informed, and that will help the later process of keeping engaged with them when they're abroad, and hopefully helping them facilitate back in terms of return. And I think the pre-departure stuff is not just for immigrants going, I think it's for the people that stay as well. Because one of the issues that came up quite strongly in the focus group is that people sense the feeling of alienation when they came home. Kind of anecdotal stuff. People coming back from London and saying, it's incredible how the tube works and Dublin bus doesn't work to the same effect, right? One lady from Germany, I mean, the Germans are efficient. I don't know if we have any Germans in the room, my apologies, but in terms of how the transport system over there works, and the response from people back home is that, don't you be coming back here with your ideas telling me, you know? So typical Irish response, right? I think the National Youth Council is on the cusp of something really important today, is that we have a thematic issue, such as youth, and if you look at the programme later on, we have a very sector-sensitive engagement, and I think bridging those two things hasn't happened before. Not to my knowledge. People might do it informally, but structurally and putting it in a public platform hasn't happened. The more you can do that, the better the outcome, I would suggest. Return ruptures, these are kind of tie into the structural side of things because they can be financial, but in the report we look very closely at the issue of vulnerability. And the indices of vulnerability are changing daily within the Irish diaspora. So just to give you a couple of examples, at the community level while people are abroad, there's a lack of intergenerational engagement, which is an issue in terms of how people gather knowledge while they're abroad, can raise issues. I'll give an example in Canada. People don't know enough about the system when they get to Canada. 2-year visa, they're not engrossed enough in the system to make a permanent residency. They might begin to overstay their visas, so issues of return then become problematic. Obviously economic, it's a harsh reality, we might as well be truth about it. Emigrating costs money. It's a financial burden for people. The identity issues, as I mentioned, and the reintegration when they come home. One possible solution to this, I think, would be creating, again, the typical academic phrase, a culture of return. What does that mean? I think the three areas, the 3 E's, as I call it, not to take the tagline of the IOM and their 3 E's, but enterprise, education, entrepreneurship. I think we have a good start in those areas, but I think they can work closer together. Again, it's probably looking at bringing back the more successful than the vulnerable, so we need to be conscious of that in terms of how we progress it forward. How am I doing for time? I promised Marie-Claire I'll be 17, so perfect, yeah? So this is the how question. And this is where my work with Diaspora matters, I suppose. One of the great things for us, and again, it's due to the work of other people as well, is that we get approached quite a lot by people across the globe to figure out what Ireland is doing in this area. So we've been trying to think about how we can actually tackle that how question. So we've come up with a methodological approach that we can put into action, which is fascinating, right? So research, cultivate, solicit, and steward. We unveiled this in more detail in the article you can see there. It's available online for free, so feel free to read it. So I'm going to bring you through that methodology, and at the end I'm going to give you an example. I think in Donegal last week the Tip O'Neill Award was awarded, and I'm going to give you a story at the end to show how diaspora networking had an impact in the Northern Ireland peace process by getting Tip O'Neill and Margaret Thatcher to work together in a very creative way. And what Irish person doesn't like a story about Maggie Thatcher? All right? So research. As I said, we see these four stages interconnected. It's about who they are, where they are, what they are doing. You're building your knowledge base in terms of who's out there. It was mentioned by one of the speakers previously. This kind of correlates to mapping. There's precedent out there in terms of mapping. Jamaica, at the minute, are doing a massive mapping project. I know in Lithuania, NAMSOR did some data mining work a little bit. And what it basically comes to is trying to figure out this question here, right? You have to understand what your diaspora can do rather than what they will do. Two very different things. So what it is at the end of the day, it's about making sure the engagement is authentic rather than assumptive. Again, not everybody will want to be engaged. So you need to try to understand their expectations, their motivations, and be realistic about it. You know, when you're engaging the diaspora, whether it's in the issue of return, don't promise something that you cannot do, because it comes back to that trust I mentioned. So a way we kind of phrase that is the notion of capacities and propensities. I think the leading organisation in the globe in terms of philanthropy that does this to the best effect is the Ireland Funds. Incredibly effective, and this is a key part of what they actually deliver. To cultivate, this is the interesting part, right? We honestly believe that diaspora engagement is about relationships with people. Again, it's the kind of softer rhetoric, but it's important. It takes time, it takes money, and it takes effort. But what you're basically trying to do is, and it has context in the sense, if you want to make it from an impulsive relationship to a long-term relationship, right? A lot of people will tap into a network when they're abroad and tap out very quickly. But we need to make sure that we keep them engaged. It's about making habitual, thoughtful, strategic, and inspirational engagements for people. I mentioned it previously, the notion of listening levels. And that's critically important. The phrase we use quite a lot is access points. And the idea about that is that you're giving, and this is not just for government, this is for organisations such as the National Youth Council and the work that you do, it's about giving people a voice. Of course, politically, you can give them a voice through voting, but there's more to it than that. So you need to provide enough access points across the spectrum of your interests and the interest of return to make sure that it's viable. Learn their concerns, interests, and hopes, as I said in the last one, and set goals and objectives. Don't be afraid to do that. You know, one of the missing links, and I'll close with it later, is that we actually don't tend to measure diaspora engagement. I mean, we have stats, but they don't tell us a lot, and that's heartbreaking. I'm a mathematician in a previous life. And I think the trust dynamic actually gets developed here, if that makes sense, because you're building partnership and collaboration with the diaspora. You're not telling them to do something, you're asking them to do something. Solicit. This is the interesting part. We're currently organising a forum at University College Dublin, and I'm slowly learning this skill of asks and tasks. I mean, don't be afraid to ask something of your diaspora once you have the 2 stages done and setting the task and goal. Key diaspora members need to be engaged in small groups with specific projects over a limited period of time, in this case for potential return. Don't go too big too soon, in a sense. Have a focus, notion of stakeholding. People like to use these phrases, but stakeholding through community and institutions. It's about giving the diaspora ownership of their relationship at home. If you do that, again, it's not easy to do that, but if you manage to do that, they tend to be a lot more sustainable in terms of what they will do for home, and potentially in terms of return, the likelihood of return will increase. And steward, this is the part that's critically important. It's like the art of making a deal. My colleague at the Clinton Institute recently referred to me as Del Boy, you know, from Only Fools and Horses. He loves the deal kind of thing, you know. But the great thing about Del Boy, he always looks after the after-sale service, right? So one-off transactional relationships into long-term sustainable ones. Just because you've connected and mobilized them, don't let them go. The most important thing that you can do for a diaspora community is make them feel important, right? In line with the area that you're working in. This will help you hopefully to avoid failure. It builds diaspora retention. Becomes particularly important because one of the things that's fascinating about today and the people that have spoken via the video is that there's an awful lot of talent in the Irish diaspora. And if we don't retain access to that talent, then at home we're a lot worse off. And particularly if we're in a position, whether now or further down the road, to facilitate return in that dimension is critically important, the issue with talent. And it came up when I was abroad, particularly in Canada. There's an incredible amount of talent. And it was important, I wanted to mention it earlier, the importance of gender-specific engagement. We do not do enough in terms of helping the female Irish diaspora across all ages. They have varying vulnerabilities, but they also have varying talents, and we need to do more in that regard. And the most important thing, give them a pat on the back. The two most important words in life are well done. Everybody loves to hear it. Don't be afraid to say it. So the story, I know we've representation from the US Embassy, so I'll give you a little bit of context on the story, to be honest. Tip O'Neill, one of the unsung heroes of the Northern Ireland peace process in the history of it, I think people know the impact he had. So I want to show you how diaspora networking can actually impact heavily in terms of that. So again, I won't mention them because they're still alive, but I wanted to talk about one first generation and one Irish American lawyer in Washington. And one of them was an advisor for Tip O'Neill. So in the early 80s, in terms of the conflict in Northern Ireland, you had the New Ireland Forum, where people were, particularly up north and the kind of Catholic community, were trying to figure out ways of creating, it was a lead way into the Anglo-Irish Agreement. And people remember Maggie Thatcher's famous out speech, right? And the story goes that the night that speech came out, John Hume was in the Dubliner restaurant in Washington. If anybody ever gets to Washington, go to the Dubliner restaurant. There's more business gets done there than anywhere, right? So John Hume was obviously upset. And this lawyer was with him on that evening, and he said, don't worry, John, we can bring her on a journey, you know? So this is Maggie Thatcher we're talking about, right? Misintransigence, right? So the Irish mind got thinking. So the chap got in touch with his colleague in Tip O'Neill's office. The Social Security reform package or something to that effect was coming up, and there was a private dinner with President Reagan, I think about 2 weeks later, coming up. So the idea was that they would get Tip O'Neill to mention the issue of the out speech and getting the discussion. I think the phrase he used, which kind of made me laugh at the time, is that Maggie Thatcher wasn't responding correctly. Right? So that was the challenge that Tip O'Neill was sent in for. So the way the story goes, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill had one-on-one time at the White House that evening, and were smoking their cigars and having their glass of brandy after dinner. So it was brought up, and this was the idea, right? Again, plays the people ego. Before Margaret Thatcher, the last person to join the joint houses of Congress was Winston Churchill, right? So the idea was, next time Maggie Thatcher was going to be in the US, she would get an invite to address the joint houses of Congress, you know? First since Churchill, significant. So Tip O'Neill brought this up, and Reagan, paraphrasing here, said, I get it, Tip, I get it. So a couple of weeks later, they were up in Camp David. You had Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. So he brought up this idea, and of course at the end of the conversation, Ronald Reagan leaned into Margaret Thatcher and said, obviously I can't invite you. That would be the Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. All right? So Margaret Thatcher took a pause, had to think about it, and started laughing. A couple of years later, the Anglo-Irish Agreement was in effect. There's something to it, right? It works. Again, I know it's digital at this stage. That story's off the record. But again, in terms of diaspora networking and this kind of process, that started by people. We have to be conscious about the role of diaspora as well. Diasporas can be, this is going off topic a bit, but diasporas can be detrimental to what you're trying to achieve as well. I think that's important to say. But the people that were involved in building that, basically two people, obviously through Tip O'Neill and his influence, but those two people, through their connection with home, had a realistic insight on what was happening in the north, and were responsibly working to change that. And again, John Hume's role was influential. So what I'm trying to say with that story is that it does work, and you don't need a lot of people to make it work. That's the beauty of diaspora engagement. So to close, key lessons, because I probably bored you enough. No one size fits all. Keep that in mind. Don't think because return worked in this context that will work in a different context. I think the role of government is a facilitator rather than an implementer. Has to be mutually beneficial. What that means is that it has to work for the diaspora as well as people at home. Minister Deanahan correctly noted that the importance of having different governmental departments take this on board, and different organisations such as the National Youth Council. We call that diasporaise. We want every company in the world, we want every government department in the world to have a diaspora portfolio. Why not? It works. Access and information is critically important, and NB should know it, nota bene, right? Very important. You need to network better. The irony is, and it's very sad, is that there's an assumption out there of the Irish that we're very good networkers. We're not. I just proved it. We're very good storytellers. Right? Well, I hope I proved it. And they're very different skills, and we have very few universities. In fact, I don't think there's any university in Ireland teaches networking. And when you're talking about engaging your diaspora, networking is critically important. The tools, it was a toolkit, so I'm putting on my Diaspora Matters hat here. Collaboration is network momentum. Cut it, 1 minute, yep. Capital harmonisation and capital realism. A lot of these organisations are brought up voluntary, and they have limited resources. We should try and get them work together. We should measure. Connecting and mobilising are different. We should work towards sustainable platforms. If you look at the work Connect Ireland, they're leading the way in that. I've covered authenticity already, and this is a key one, high tech and high touch. Right? We live in a digital age. It's not enough just to connect with them that way. We need the high touch, and that came out so far. The conclusion has been covered already. The report itself is available on the UCD Clinton website. Feel free to download it. The most important thing, be critical of it. We want feedback. And just thank you to Marie Claire. She's doing all the work for us in the National Youth Council. Thanks to UCD Clinton issue colleagues, Professor Liam Kennedy, Dr. Madeline Elias and Catherine Carey. I hope I didn't misrepresent your work, which is important. The presentation was developed in association with Kingsley, and if you want to connect, there are the details. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yep. Martin, thanks very much for that really great presentation. I think I really like the fact that you talked about the how, because I think we can talk about the why and get down to practical measures, and also some really interesting insights and stories, as you said, as you mentioned as well. So I think it was really, really, really helpful. So thanks very much for that. And I suppose really in terms of this issue, it's not just an Irish issue. As Martin mentioned, other countries are taking a lead and are grappling with the issue of immigration, return migration, diaspora. And I suppose we felt it was important then to get an insight on what's happening in another country. So that's why we're really delighted to invite from Lithuania. And I have to apologise to Dovilė in advance. I probably will mangle her second name, but we're delighted to invite that we have Dovilė Žvalionytė. I think I close enough, hopefully anyway. Thanks very much. Dovilė is a qualified policy analyst with 9 years of experience in researching various public policy issues. As a research manager at Public Policy and Management at the Management Institute, she has worked on a range of research and consultancy assignments to national and international authorities, including the European Commission and its agencies. Her main research interests focus on migration policy, labour mobility, employment and social inclusion, as well as experimental research methods. Concerning migration research, Dovilė has been involved in a number of studies that focused on measures fostering return migration of economic migrants, the migration of scientists and other highly qualified workers, and the effectiveness of the Lithuanian migration policy, and the scale and pattern of circular migration of Lithuanians. And the latter research resulted in a co-edited monograph, Vicious Circle, return and repeat migration of Lithuanians, and a follow-up research project on the reintegration of return migrants into the labour market and society in Lithuania. So at this stage, I'd like to invite Dovilė to address the seminar. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm really pleased to be here and want to thank to the National Youth Council of Ireland and Marie-Claire in particular for the opportunity to talk at this conference. And speaking about migration policy and migration management strategies, you might not know that we in Lithuania are usually looking up to Ireland. And it would be not an overstatement that nearly every study that has been published on Lithuanian migration over the last 10 years in Lithuania mentions Ireland as an example of good practice in, for instance, keeping links with its diaspora and encouraging return migration, especially at the time of the economic boom in the 90s. Moreover, after reading a very interesting report, Time to Go on Irish youth migration, I have realized how much Ireland and Lithuania has in common in terms of current migration trends and their effects on both countries. That is, intensive youth emigration and rather limited return migration resulting in changes in population size and age structure, as well as possible workforce depletion and brain drain. Therefore, I thought that you might be interested to hear about some structural and attitudinal barriers to return migration and reintegration of Lithuanians that we have discovered during one of our recent research, and also about a successful policy program aiming at lowering those barriers for returning young professionals. And but before starting to talk about barriers and policies, let me just set the scene briefly. So during the last 2 decades, the emigration from Lithuania was very intensive because the economic situation in the country has been difficult and people sought to exploit opportunities to earn better income abroad. More than 700,000 Lithuanians, or up to 20% of the population of Lithuania in 1989, are likely to have experienced emigration from 1990 up to now. The annual emigration from Lithuania especially increased after the country joined the European Union in 2004. The rate of declared return migration has begun to grow since 2011 and keeps increasing, as the most recent data show that in 2013 more than 20,000 people came back. However, return migration was still only half of emigration even in 2013. It might be interesting to you that Ireland has been among top destination countries since Lithuania joined the EU. And accordingly, around 15% of Lithuanian returnees have lived in Ireland at one time or another. That means that your immigrants, some of your immigrants are our returnees, actually. Most of immigrants are very young, mostly in their 20s, whereas returnees are on average slightly older, that is in early 30s. So when we speak about migration, for the most part, we speak about youth migration. And the first barrier to return and successful integration in the home country's labor market I want to talk about is underuse of returnees' skills and knowledge acquired abroad. Last year, me and my colleagues conducted a representative survey of return migrants in Lithuania. It showed that as many as 8 of 10 migrants who have returned to live in Lithuania improved some of their skills while abroad. For the most part, these are foreign language skills and cross-cultural communication skills, but they also increased their professional knowledge, skills how to use modern work tools, and something like that. The most important source of increase of skills is non-formal learning, mostly in the workplace. It should be noted that frequently migrants who have a lower level of education, and that is non-university education, or jobs that do not match their qualification, also gain new knowledge or skills. And more than half of the migrants who have returned to live in Lithuania have expectations that they will be able to use the knowledge or skills acquired abroad. However, among all returnees holding a job in Lithuania, only 9% regularly used the knowledge acquired abroad, 27% used it often, and more than 60% use it rarely or never. Data analysis also revealed that underuse of the knowledge is a particularly strong factor in repeat migration. As shown by the findings of our research, the more the returnees believe that the experience acquired abroad are not properly applied and rewarded in Lithuania, the higher the chances that they will consider migrating again. And as you can see from this second graph on the slide, many returnees don't feel adequately rewarded. The second barrier to return is perception of the value of migration experience in the home country of returnees, in Lithuania in my case. Regardless of how much human capital return migrants bring from abroad, the successful integration of returnees is unlikely if their migration experience is not considered as an asset by the home country's labor market. As our research showed, the Lithuanian labor market unfortunately is not very returnee friendly. The returnees, in assessing whether the migration experience helped them in their employment in Lithuania, frequently stated that their emigration experience had no effect, while 7% even thought that it was a disadvantage. Returnee responses associated with those of employers surveyed in 2013. Over 60% of employers indicated that migration experience would have no effect on their choice of employee, and 1 in 10 employers stated that this would be a disadvantage. As many as 8 out of 10 Lithuanian employers also indicated that when hiring a new employee, they would choose one with work experience and education acquired in Lithuania rather than abroad. One of the explanations for why migration experience is generally not recognized in the labor market is the widespread suggestion among employers and the broader public that return is a signal of failure. More than half of employers in Lithuania and almost half of the population of Lithuania agree with a statement that usually those who have failed abroad return to Lithuania. You can see the data on the graph. So return is like a signal of failure, and employers who support this opinion are more likely to assess migration experience as a disadvantage rather than an advantage. It should also be noted that the association of return with failure is more characteristic to those individuals who have less exposure to migrants. For example, those who themselves do not have migration experience compared to those who did have such experience. This implies that the negative assessment of return often stems not from direct experience, but is formed by the environment, for example, media, and therefore is not necessarily justified. Among the various reasons for return identified by returnees, motives pointing to failure were secondary importance and mentioned by not more than 1/3 of returnees. While it cannot be denied that some returnees fail to be open enough in identifying real factors which determined their return, recurring trends observed in many studies in Lithuania and abroad that people return because of their family and relatives and wish to live in their own environment allow to believe that in this case, failure abroad is not the most important motive. So in order to increase return migration and ensure its sustainability, much more attention should be paid to the integration process of returnees. in particular to increasing the demand for the experience and human capital in the labor market of their home country. In the second part of my presentation, I am going to present one successful policy initiative implemented in Lithuania that address all three barriers to return that I have talked about. So, in 2012, state agencies Invest Lithuania and Enterprise Lithuania, in partnership with the Lithuanian government, launched a junior professional program, Cork Lietuvai, that what means Create for Lithuania. The program aims to attract young professionals who have graduated from universities abroad to come back to Lithuania in order to work in public sector institutions. It's a one-year work placement program. The selected returnees are offered paid internships in more than 25 various institutions of the public sector. This year, the program was also extended to municipality level, and 20 municipalities agreed to host the participants of the program. How the program is implemented. Each year, a select team of 20 young professionals are chosen to work on strategic governmental projects and to participate in a high-level decision-making process. Every 4 months, they move to a new institution. 3 separate 4-month rotations in the public sector are tailor-made according to experience and preferences of the participants. At the end of each rotation, the young professionals present their projects to the Lithuanian government as well as the public. As a result of the program, the returnees get an opportunity to apply their knowledge, to initiate changes at public institutions, to develop their professional network, and to build their CVs. While participating institutions gain new insights and ideas from the young professionals, improve their public image, and promote cooperation between the Lithuanian diaspora and the public sector. Program Create for Lithuania has attracted a lot of attention among young Lithuanian professionals abroad. According to the managers of the program, they received more than 400 applications in 3 years. Since only 20 applicants were selected for the program each year, the competition is quite intense. 6-7 applications per place. The participants of the program have come back from all over the world, that is from more than 30 different countries so far. As you can see from the graph, most popular countries are the United Kingdom and the United States. Around 30% of the participants have returned from Ireland. The young professionals are well educated. Most of them have master's degrees, some are PhD students. According to the participants, the program was instrumental in their decision to return to Lithuania after graduation. As much as 99% of them say that wouldn't have come back in the absence of the program. It seems that program has also facilitated their integration after return. 9 out of 10 participants have stayed in Lithuania after finishing the program. Around one third of them keep working in the public sector, while others found jobs in private sector, most often in prestigious local or international companies. The program resulted in a number of innovative governmental projects and policy changes. For example, the participants have designed a national system to collect, recycle, and recover packaging wastes, launched open data governmental initiative, initiated important changes in immigration and youth employment policies. The success of the program very much depends on support provided by the political leaders and the heads of the participating institutions. The program has been continually supported by the President of Lithuania as well as by the government. Another important success factor was good and well-targeted publicity. The program is well known and regarded in Lithuanian society, especially among well-educated young people. The program managers use all kinds of social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and so on, to advertise this opportunity to young professionals. The participants of the program also engage in a variety of social actions that attract media attention. Finally, the program itself achieved international recognition. Last year, the program was noted by The Guardian as a fine effort to encourage the young professionals to return home. It should also be presented as a good practice example in a forthcoming publication of United Nations on talent development and retention. And all these features make the program attractive to well-educated, talented young people. Speaking about some challenges, the managers have mentioned that the participants are very bright, but also very young people. Their average age is 25 years. As a result, some of them have no work experience. Nevertheless, they are expected to act as policy advisors to much more experienced civil servants during the program, and that is not easy sometimes. Another challenge is remuneration related. While in the program, participants receive a market-based level salary and benefits, usually higher than average wage in similar positions in the public sector. If they stay in the public sector after the program, their remuneration goes down. Therefore, most of the participants choose to work in private sector after the program. Despite some challenges, the program managed to say to young Lithuanians graduating from universities abroad, keep calm and apply for the program Cork Lietuvai, or Create for Lithuania, and they actually do. And to sum up my short presentation, Lithuanian experience shows that well-focused and well-designed interventions such as junior professional program Create for Lithuania may lower structural and attitudinal barriers to return migration, especially for the participants. For example, because of the program Create for Lithuania, its participants could use skills and knowledge acquired abroad. Their migration experience was a great advantage to them, and they were presented to others as very successful young people, not failures. However, such programs usually target relatively small groups of highly skilled migrants, such as young or not so young professionals, researchers, and so on. And therefore, the key policy question and issue is how to scale up such programs and how to reach the rest of the migrants. Thank you very much.
Great. I think this should be working from here now. Can you hear me? Yes? Yeah, great. Dovilė, thanks very much. I think it was really interesting to get kind of a sense of kind of the numbers of Lithuanians, particularly young people from Lithuania, and also the attitudes of people in Lithuania, and particularly those return migrants, and also people who are repeat immigrants, and then just this practical program that you mentioned as well, so that was really helpful. I'm conscious, we have some time now, we have about 20 minutes for discussion, and I'm conscious that you've been listening a lot, the people in the audience. I think maybe it would be a good idea to get some feedback or comments or questions for the panel, or if you have any comments yourself. We have some roving mics here, so we can ask people to maybe. So essentially, if you could just maybe put your hand up and just say your name and which organisation you're with, and if you want to direct a question to the panelist, or if you might make a general comment. So we have down here at the back. We have two actually. At the back. Yeah. So first down here, and then Paul. Yeah. So Paul, we'll take these two questions anyway, yeah.
Hello, and first of all, thank you very much to NYCI for producing the report. I think it's very timely and there is a great need to support returning migrants. As you can all probably tell, I have one of the more common Irish accents. It's called East Leitrim. I have experienced immigration firsthand because I grew up as the son of immigrants in England. I've actually found this quite painful. In fact, very painful, and also I have a deep sense of anger in some ways, and it's very difficult. I was thinking through what's been going on here and listening to those young people. I heard that language 50 years ago as a child from the Irish immigrants of then, and I heard those dreams and aspirations to return then. This weekend I met a man on a beach in Sligo who had returned after a lifetime in England, and he's been back in this country a year. And the more common pattern for returnees is in fact young people leave and come back once they've reared their children abroad. And that is a strong reality. I also was minded of a man called Thomas Gilmartin who had a huge impact on this country upon his return as a migrant to Ireland, and I was actually harrowed by the experience of listening to his son on Irish television, kind of going through that experience. So I think there is a lot we need to do in terms of looking at what the return means. I grew up believing I was Irish, and I come back here and at times people will say to me, well, you're English, when English is the last thing I could ever be. If any of you have ever lived in England, you will know for a fact that someone who is an immigrant in England cannot be English. I could be British possibly, but not English. And I've always thought of myself as Irish. One of the things I found coming back is what you were talking about, is that conflicted personality, because I obviously grew up in both countries. I grew up in England and in Ireland. The sadness for me is that my grandmother left Sligo in 1913. My father left Ireland in the 50s. My cousins left in the 80s. The next generations of cousins have left now. I think as well as looking at the return of migrants, we have to look at how we stop the problems of migration and look to building a strong economy here, because that is what will service both migrants returning and also young people now in Ireland. I'm sorry it's more of a statement than a question.
Thanks, Paul. And then, here.
I've been working in immigration for about the last 30 years or so. The big issue that I see over the years is that how do you translate the language from the academy to the language of migrant high street? That's the big problem, because at the end of the day, immigration is the human heart and a journey of hope. And I remember in the late 70s, early 80s, we ran conferences and information programs in Britain with regards to return migration. And it's extremely difficult to break through that barrier because immigration operates on anecdotal information. And the other damning thing about return is that the vast majority of people who think about return do so after coming back from holidays during the summertime, when everything is fine, good, everything looks good, and people seem to think that there's tremendous affluence and everything else. And I think I think this is an important conference, and I think the book here is absolutely important, but I think the greatest challenge is how do you get your information down to the high street? How do you get objective information about pre-departure and about return down into the high street? Also, the other thing is, let's face it, diaspora, Irish diaspora is something new. When we were with our backs to the walls in Britain in the 70s, 80s and 90s, the diaspora, the affluent, the articulate and the artistic were pretty well silent in the diaspora with regards to the issues of justice and human rights, etc. So I'm delighted that the diaspora is beginning to emerge and beginning to emerge in a supportive role, and also that it's been recognised as a resource by the Irish government and vice versa.
Great, thanks very much. Does anybody else want to? Yep, just here. Yep.
Sorry, my name is Johnny Sheehan. I was just wondering, a couple of things struck me from both Martin and Dovilė. Martin, you mentioned, and apologies if I got this wrong, about the how of supporting returning migrants. You mentioned your 3 E's, and you mentioned education, enterprise, and entrepreneurship.
Yep.
And I was going to suggest that actually one of the ways to support as well is around empathy and around, and it brought up what Dovilė said around the stigma and the sense of considering returned migrants as failures, or, you know, the kind of like, well, if you were so good over there, why are you coming back, and so on. And I was just wondering, in terms of the how you talked about rather than the why, how do you think that returning migrants can be supported? In what ways can they be supported in terms of overcoming that, maybe that stigma, or the lack of empathy from people around them returning, to create those conditions rather than just simply the good jobs or whatever to return to? And what role then do you think the government should be playing in facilitating that?
Okay, great.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah. I think you're right. I think empathy is critically important. One of the things, and it comes back to the point that the chap before made, is that I think it comes up in the NYC, the National Youth Council report, and ourselves as well, in terms of our methodology for the report, in terms of breaking the barriers to academia. You have to give them a voice. You know, and I think if you read the 2 reports, the emphasis methodologically and content-wise is that, yes, we assess and analyse and so on and so forth, but there's actually quite a good representation of migrants there. So I think that's one part of the strategy in terms of empathy. You get their story out, maybe even before they come back, you know, because I think there's an education process for people that stay behind as well. It's not necessarily a kind of stigma dimension or a sense of jealousy of people going away, but there's definitely a disconnect between the people that went, how they view immigration, and the people who stay behind. It came up quite strongly in the focus group. In terms of how the government support, I think it needs to come from the communities, to be quite frank. I think if you look at programs such as the Immigrant Support Programme, they're in place to support organisations that do this work. And I think in terms of maybe it's something to explore for them in terms of their Irish portfolio of the organisations that they support in Ireland, to include this type of work. Because one of the things that we came across, and well, we used the phrase, and we had a fascinating meeting with the GA yesterday, and I brought it up with them, is that we're trying to, what we say in the report basically, is that culture and the stories of people abroad is therapeutic. Right? And when you say something like that, it's kind of something that you shouldn't say out loud, but people know it happens. You know, because culture, we don't fully understand how culture works. So if we can mobilise that here in Ireland, in terms of how the culture of immigration is either narrated through the organisations themselves or immigrants, I think that would help break down the barriers. But it's a difficult one to answer. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, to be honest.
Sorry, if I could just come back on that. I mean, I think you're right. It needs to be done within the communities. It needs to be done by those structures, not the government itself, but they can't do it on air. And they need the, the supporting resources, investment into them in order to be able to do that. Be they, youth organisations, be they community-based groups and so on. They need the investment.
No, of course. I mean, just in terms of that, I think, I can't speak on behalf of the Immigrant Support Programme, but that's what it's there to do. In a sense, there are financial resources there. It's just about building the relevance. And when we come back earlier, and I said kind of these organisations to have a diaspora element to what they do, that's how you build the relevance to access into these funding streams. Does that make sense? That'd be my opinion.
Dovilė, you mentioned in your presentation about the attitudes of employers, I think it was, and also the population around returning immigrants. I mean, maybe Martin can comment on this as well. I mean, I'm not sure if the same level of stigma is attached to Irish immigration or not, because there probably has been a tradition over a number of communities of people returning and whatever. But how has that been? You mentioned the programme that the government are developing. I mean, is there also attempts to address those attitudinal barriers in Lithuania around return migration? Yeah.
Yeah, one more example could be a quite new network of professionals, which is called Global Lithuanian Leaders, and which aims to build a positive image of immigrants and returnees, and to encourage immigrants to participate in somehow in Lithuanian public life, or in various initiatives, so that is a network of around 500 high-level professionals, and I think such initiatives help to build better image of migrants and returnees as a group. Network is more like a non-governmental initiative, but supported by our government, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is responsible for the links with diaspora. So it's a good initiative.
Martin, on that issue of the attitudes, I mean, obviously from our sense was that in Ireland that wasn't such an issue. Would that be true? Or in terms of attitudes of people in Ireland, the failure thing, yeah.
No, it's still there. No, it is. It came out quite strongly in the focus group. But I mean, I suppose, it's a very simple contradiction and in diaspora is that the questions we're kind of asking today, they're not new. So it comes back to the point that the chap makes. Yes, we can talk about migration and immigration. It comes back to the language debate, fair enough. But I mean, in a very simple way, historians will kill me for saying this. But in a sense, the questions that immigrants or diaspora communities or members ask themselves, they haven't changed that much from what they've asked themselves historically. Yes, the frameworks that we have to try and answer those questions have changed, but the actual core questions haven't. And I think there could be something in that, in terms of bringing those together. But the attitudinal stuff, in terms of the communities here, welcoming people back, there was definitely elements of antagonism in that context. Okay. It is there, yeah.
Something that has come up quite a bit on social media since we started was just the issue of voting rights. And I'm not sure what the situation, I don't know, Dovilė, if you want to comment on what the situation, if Lithuania is in Ireland and there's an election in Lithuania, does the person have a right? And also, Martin, in terms of your work, do you want to comment on voting rights? And then
yeah, well, I suppose I'll put my cards on the table. For the toolkit, I wrote the section on voting rights. So I have an interest in the area. I think in terms of, I think it's important to give a voice. I think even since the toolkit was published, the appetite and the attitude towards voting rights has changed. I think if you look in detail at the issue, I think the issue of voting rights in the presidential election is something that should be supported. I'm not sure how far it will go in that sense, but I think if you look at the dynamics of voting in terms of voting outside the country is the rhetoric that a lot of people use in terms of, but they're basically talking about migrant voting. And the one thing you have to be conscious of as well in terms of how you fit it into how the Irish define diaspora, because you're going to have to put a limit on who can vote in terms of identity and so on and so forth and structure. So there's something that needs to be teased out there. But the broad kind of references in terms of voting rights is that, and this is probably a controversial thing to say, is that the lobby for the voting rights tend to be a lot more impactful than the actual figures that turn out to vote. If you look internationally, but the kind of example that gets bandied about quite a lot is actually Mexico. Mexico is quite a unique example because 96% of their diaspora live in the US. But the lobby for voting rights in the Mexican presidential elections was very vociferous. And out of, I think it was like 9 to 10 million people who were registered to vote, I think 46,000 people voted. And if you look at the figures, I think it should happen because I think the Irish are working so hard for it that we might actually buck that trend, to be honest.
Do you want, in terms of Lithuanians outside the country, have they the right to? Yeah,
they have a right to vote as long as they have citizenship, participation in the elections among immigrants is rather low, and therefore discussion about possibility to have e-voting is very relevant and very often, we talk very often about this possibility, especially because we have so many immigrants, and immigrants think that government should allow e-voting, but because of security reasons and other similar arguments, they do not have e-voting.
We have some more. Yep. Great.
I am Mary Gilmartin from Maynooth University. I think it's very timely that we're having a discussion about return migration, because it's clear from CSO estimates and even from an earlier period from GAA transfer statistics that there is a crisis of return migration, and the numbers of people with Irish nationality returning to Ireland are at the lowest figure they've been for decades. And we have some indication of what barriers to return migration and the barriers experienced by return migrants are from previous return migrants. We have extensive studies of the experience of return migrants in the past. But Mary Claire touched on some very interesting points in her presentation. I think it's very important that we acknowledge them. One of the key barriers to return migration are the structural barriers that have been created as a result of austerity. One of the main ones of those, as far as I can see, is the public sector recruitment ban and the deterioration of work conditions in the public sector. And that's an issue that's created a real barrier to return migration for skilled migrants, particularly female migrants outside Ireland. We have other issues too that are creating contemporary barriers to return migrants related to quality of life, access to housing, access to childcare, access to schools. And these are issues that are being faced not just by return migrants, but by people who are resident in Ireland and by immigrants who are living in Ireland, who are remarkably absent from many of the discussions that we're having about contemporary migration. And one of the reasons I think that return migration is at an all-time low is because the kinds of issues of inequality and social justice and injustice that are resulting from the consequences of austerity and the effects of austerity mean that we're creating a society that not many people want to return to. So I think there's an imperative on those of us who remain as well as on those of us who leave Ireland, and of those of us who live in Ireland and who call Ireland home regardless of nationality or citizenship, to think very carefully about the kind of society we want, and to listen very carefully to the way in which statistics about migration, both immigration and emigration, are being used right now to tell a particular story, which is a story that's masking the inequalities that are making this a more difficult and more unfair society to live in.
No, thanks very much. I think they're...
Just to let you know, Mary, we're actually working with Irish Aid at the minute to put on a global diaspora and development forum where we will be showcasing immigrant communities here and tackling those issues. So I'll be happy to share the information with that. It's happening at the end of October.
Hello, Joe O'Brien is my name. I'm working with Cross Care Migrant Project, and in one form or another we've been working with Irish immigrants since the late 1940s. We're one of the Irish-based organisations funded by the Emigrant Support Programme in the Department of Foreign Affairs, just to acknowledge that. But firstly, just to thank the National Youth Council for actually making this a debate. It's something we've worked on for many years ourselves directly with people who are returning, but it's never really been hugely debated in the public domain, bar some issues, I think, with older Irish immigrants returning and access to welfare is something we continue to work on. But just to explain what we do a little bit, we do provide a pre-departure information and support service to Irish immigrants, and I suppose with the advent of the internet, that's allowed us to reach multiples of the amount of people we reached before. We've about 40 to 50,000 people accessing pre-departure information on our website every year. And on the other side, we do work with returning migrants as well, but with a focus possibly on those who are in more vulnerable situations, people returning back with no family connections, people who are possibly facing homeless situations as well and difficulty accessing welfare. And I suppose just to flag something that's coming up in the next couple of weeks that's extremely relevant to today's conference as well, is that at the Oireachtas Foreign Affairs Committee in 2 weeks tomorrow, we'll be presenting a proposal for an emigrant register. And this will be a very practical suggestion in terms of facilitating return migration as well. Very simple idea. It would simply be a database. You get the emails of Irish immigrants who are abroad or who are leaving or who are thinking about it, and the Irish state would collect them up and then start to, I suppose, deal with the issue that's been flagged in many research reports in recent years, the Youth Council report from last year, the UCC Emigre report, this ongoing, and again, not a new issue of disconnection. So if this database was created, the Irish state would be able to connect with a whole range of people in a variety of countries for a variety of reasons, and would improve the sense of disconnection that's going on. More practically speaking, of course, it could tell people about job opportunities coming up. And I suppose the example that we always tout when we're pushing the immigrant register idea is that if you're unemployed and you're in Ireland, you could actually get letters from in Trio in Ireland about job opportunities abroad. So it does not make sense that we would contact our Irish immigrants abroad to tell them about emerging job opportunities here as well. So this is something we're going to be pushing in the next couple of weeks, and we're in front of the Oireachtas in 2 weeks' time on that particular issue. Just to say briefly as well, the Minister alluded to it in his speech. We're at the moment analysing the results of a mental health survey that we did with 500 Irish immigrants across the globe, and we hope to be putting that together and have that published in the next couple of months. I'm stuck in the middle of it myself at the moment, but just to say it's what's striking about it is actually the pain that people actually feel and disconnection. Being away from your family is a very difficult thing, and it tends not to get remembered very much in public debate, and I suppose it's a good place to bring it here today in terms of return migration. That's something that's coming up an awful lot in that survey as well. And again, I think the internet is useful here because it's allowed people to be very honest and anonymous, I suppose, in terms of what the experience is like for them in terms of their mental health as well. So we look forward to publishing that, and finally just to thank you, Council, again for making this a public debate. Thank you.
Great. We'll just take one more question, Stroke Company. You could keep it as short as possible, I appreciate it. Yeah, just say where you're from.
Well, more than a question, it's kind of a statement. Bringing it from the point of a migrant, I was born outside Ireland, in Argentina. I've been living here 12 years. So the issue is migrants also do need to be brought more into this because it took me 11 years to get my citizenship under the old process. And a lot of the times I nearly had to leave the country due to financial reasons regarding with the visa, mainly because it was the government itself didn't really help much on that process. But then as well, with my course, I've been fortunate to be able to travel I've been able to travel to France and recently back from Italy working. It's an issue as well as a young person and as a student. It's the opportunities which you offer, which are an offer for people that sometimes don't feel the best. The reason I went to Italy was because I felt that for me, I had much better opportunity working over there and then increasing my job prospects after I graduate than had I undertaken my work placement here in Dublin. Also, the same reason why I went to study abroad, just to bring that element of internationalization. And sometimes it feels that as a migrant and as an expat and a return migrant, it feels hard to reintegrate living in Dublin. And I would love to stay, and I would love to, but I'm again thinking I'll be graduating soon, and I'm already thinking of going abroad. And each time I go abroad and each time I come back, it feels harder and harder to stay at times. And someday, I don't know, it might be my last migration out of the country.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks very much. Yeah. Okay, well, I think it's just 7 minutes past 1, so we probably have to break there. But I just, at this stage, thanks for the comments and questions. I think, I think it is clear this is not a new issue, but we need to, I suppose, as has been suggested here, come up with practical ways and means by which we can address it and ensure also that Ireland is somewhere where people not only we can support them to come back, but is somewhere where they can be supported and actually have a decent standard of living here. So I'd like to thank Martin and Dovilė for their presentations and their comments as well. And I think now we're going to, before you clap, I'll just to tell you we have lunch, which has been served, I think, if I can find my notes, which I probably can't, but I think it's been. Great. Mary, thank you for saving me again. Great. Thanks very much, and I'll see you after lunch. Okay, great. Thank you. Martin, thanks, Mary.